Thank you. Thank you. So, such an honor to be here, to be among friends in this very intimate setting. I was watching the Copa America last week, South American football championship, and at the end of one game, the Jamaican player, they were playing Argentina, the Jamaican player went up to Messi, Lionel Messi, and asked him to take a selfie. And I thought about it, and I thought, that's great. And then I thought about the fact that my Lionel Messi is right here on stage. So I'm going to take a selfie with Marty. Thank you. So, James, over the years, I've learned so much from you about the eudaimonic turn, about positive humanities. We've had amazing conversations around William James and philosophy, and I think today is my chance to reciprocate, and I'm going to teach you something. The introduction. I felt a lot of pressure coming here, and now I feel even more pressure after this introduction. A lot of expectations, and James, here is the best introduction that I've ever had, maybe for future, I learned from it. So I was giving a lecture in a very large international high-tech company, and the CEO goes up on stage to introduce me. And with a thick Israeli accent, he says the following. Good afternoon, everybody. Today, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar. And we brought Dr. Ben-Shahar today because he's the cheapest speaker we found. Now, you see, after that, I could do no wrong, but today, I'll do my best, I promise. I want to share with you now, I want to get serious here. I want to share with you some of the behind the scenes that goes into preparing presentations like this. The most difficult part leading up to this presentation was deciding what to wear. And let me elaborate on this very important topic. You see, it started weeks ago when I emailed Esther and asked her what is the dress code, and she said, well, either business casual or business professional. The saga continued yesterday when Marty and I were on the same flight and we were talking about what to wear today. And then it continued this morning when I see Marty, and he said, I decided to wear shorts and flip-flops to this presentation. I said, no, Marty, how can you do that? Especially knowing that James, Carmelo, and Kim are going to wear ties. What am I going to do? You can imagine the stress that I experienced. Okay, and then Marty said, fine, I'm going to wear what I'm wearing. And I said, okay, so I'm going to wear business casual. But then there was another challenge. There was a lot of pressure on me from ex-students from the Certificate in Positive Psychology, from Métis, IDC, from the UPenn students and Harvard students to wear my pink shirt. You remember that? But I thought, that pink shirt shows way too much skin for such an occasion. So I did wear a pink shirt, and I folded the sleeves to show a little bit of skin. So if you think that it's easy coming here and just delivering a lecture, it's not. A lot of thought goes behind it. What I want to talk today about is change, because we're here because we want to bring about change, positive change in our organizations, schools, in our families, in ourselves. And I want to talk about change looking at it from the context of appreciative inquiry. meaning appreciating what we are already doing in the field of positive psychology, appreciating so that it can appreciate, grow, so that we can have more of it. And I want to begin by talking about 3 different ways of understanding change. And I'm going to do it by sharing with you 3 stories. The first story. A guy goes to his therapist, and the therapist tells him, today we're going to talk about Freudian slips in our session. And the therapist explains Freudian slips are those funny mistakes you make sometimes when you want to say one thing, but mistakenly you say something else. So tell me, he tells his client, have you made any Freudian slips recently? Have you made any of those funny mistakes? And the guy thinks for a minute and he says, yeah, actually just last night I made one of those funny mistakes, a Freudian slip. I was having dinner with my parents and I wanted to ask them to pass me the salad, but instead I made a funny mistake and said, you stupid idiots, I hate you, you ruined my life. So this approach to change is about the circumstances. It's all about our upbringing. It's all about the environment. And if we want to bring about change, understanding it in the context of circumstances, environment, we need to think about what organizations do we create? How do we parent? What schools do we build? This is the path to change. Second story. A man and a woman meet online and they go on their first date. They go to a movie. The light dims, the commercials go on. Not a minute passes, and the guy makes his move. He sends his hand toward the woman. As soon as she realizes what he's doing, she slaps his hand. And then he says, but, I can't help it. It's in my genes. To which she responds, I don't care what's in your genes, just stay out of mine. The second approach to change is it's all about our genes. Now, if we think about change in this context, focusing on genes, well, then we have to think about chemical interventions, biological interventions as the path to change. There's a third approach. This is a story told by Dan Millman, who wrote The Path of the Peaceful Warrior. In his wonderful book, Dan Millman writes about Sam. Sam is a constructions worker. Every day, Sam goes to work. And every day at noon, they break for lunch. And every day, no exception, as they sit for lunch, the construction workers, Sam takes out his sandwich, looks at it and says, oh no, not peanut butter and jelly sandwich again, day in and day out for months. Until finally one of his co-workers, another construction worker, says to him, Sam, enough already. Stop complaining, just tell your wife to make you another sandwich. To which Sam responds, my wife? I'm not married, I make my own sandwiches. This is about choice. We have a choice what sandwiches we make day in and day out. Now, most of us focus it here to believe explicitly or implicitly in the third one, as well as the first one. Well, let's create organizations. Well, it is all about our choice. Are they true, though? Fortunately, they are. Going back to our field, positive psychology, research by Sonia Lubomirsky. On average, 50% is determined by our genes. It's a lot. 10% on average by external circumstances. And 40% left by our choices. Now, with an emphasis on average, because those 10% can grow a lot. Think about it. People who are living in a war zone right now, or in dire poverty, their external circumstances matter a lot more than 10%. Or people who have SAD, seasonal affective disorder, who move to a cold climate where there is not much sun. The external circumstances matter a lot more than 10%. The same with genes. It could be a lot more or a lot less than 50%. Same with our choices. If we, as positive psychologists, as coaches, as therapists, as teachers, want to bring about change, we need to think about how we can increase the 10% of external circumstances. How can we create environments that impact individuals more than 10%? How can we endow people with the choice, with the ability to make choice, healthy choices in their lives, so that we can extend beyond 40%? So we think about this a lot. We think about this a lot. The thing, though, is that if we look at the macro level of society, things are not getting better. Now, this doesn't mean we're not doing the right things, because we don't have a control group. Things could have been a lot worse. However, if we look at society as a whole, levels of depression are going up, anxiety, stress going up. If we look at relationships, very important predictor of well-being, not looking good. High levels of divorce, and those people who stay together are not often happy together in the long term. I want to show you a quick video of one of the most important psychologists of the 21st century, talking about how things are changing and not always for the better. Allow me to invite on video Ellen DeGeneres.
I was watching the news the other day, brought to you by Paxil. Well, now I need it. Smart advertising. That's another thing, too. When I was a kid, the news was on once a day. You either caught it or you missed it. Now the news is on 24 hours a day. And that's not enough. They got a guy talking, and then there's a crawl down there. So you got that guy talking, you got the crawl going, you're online, you're putting in your opinion on your poll. No, I say to that, no! There should just be one crawl that goes around over and over again. Things are getting worse. That's all we need. You know? I feel sorry for the newscasters, you know. We can turn it off, but that's their job, and they have to read these stories, and they're just coming up on the teleprompter. They don't know what's coming up, and they've got to go through this range of emotion that there were no survivors. And next, which candy bar helps you lose weight? Still to come is an asteroid headed towards Earth. But first, where to find the cheesiest pizza in town? Also, a disturbing new study finds that studies are disturbing.
So let me share with you a disturbed study, which was discussed by Daniel Goleman, Boyatsis, and McKee. Although studies have shown that real change can result from training, most of the time the change doesn't seem to be sustained, which is why it is often called the honeymoon effect. We can do a lot better when it comes to bringing about lasting change. We can better exploit the 40% choices, the 10% circumstances. How can we do it? If we go back to the roots of positive psychology. Back in 2000, Marty Seligman published a seminal paper in which he said the following: the aim of positive psychology is to catalyze a change in psychology from a preoccupation only with repairing the worst things in life to also building the best qualities in life. And the emphasis I want to put on in this important quote is on the word best. Didn't say better, didn't say okay, didn't even say good. He said best. I want to go back close to 50 years before that to the founder of humanistic psychology, Abraham Maslow, who talked about a similar idea, talked about studying the best. He talked about how we do research and what we look for in statistics. Let me quote him extensively. With this kind of research, studying the best, What this kind of research design means is a change in our conception of statistics, and especially of sampling theory. What I'm frankly espousing here is what I've been calling growing tip statistics, taking my title from the fact that it is at the growing tip of the plant that the greatest genetic action takes place. Like Marty, what Maslow was arguing for was studying the best, the growing tip of a plant. He continues, if we want to know how fast a human being can run, then it is no use to average out the speed of a good sample of the population. It is far better to collect Olympic gold medal winners and see how well they can do. If we want to know the possibilities for spiritual growth, value growth, or moral development in human beings, then I maintain that we can learn most by studying our most moral, ethical, or saintly people. Focus on the best. He continues, on the whole, I think it is fair to say that human history is a record of the ways in which human nature has been sold short. The highest possibilities of human nature have practically always been underrated. Certainly, it seems more and more clear that what we call normal in psychology is really a psychopathology of the average. So undramatic and so widely spread that we don't even notice it ordinarily. Growing tip statistics, studying the best, as opposed to the psychopathology of the average. Now, when I first read this text in the farther reaches of human nature, I must say I wasn't entirely comfortable. Because when I read about this, I immediately think elitism, undemocratic. Because my democratic sentiments say, let's give voice to everybody. Studying the best? So what is the response to this feeling or to this issue with growing tip statistics? Well, first of all, growing tip statistics is not about ignoring the average. It's about also studying the growing tip, the best. In many ways, this is what positive psychology says in a slightly different context. Positive psychology has never and will never say, let's stop studying anxiety or depression or schizophrenia. Not interesting. Important, significant, meaningful, and let's not ignore what is working, the best qualities in life. Strength, love, passion, calling. So it's a similar move to positive psychology in terms of also studying the growing tip. And what we do when we do that is that we shift from the psychopathology of the average to the health of the growing tip. We get a fuller picture of the possibilities. So it doesn't exclude studying the average. Second, what the average does primarily is describe the situation. It doesn't prescribe. Because take, for example, if I wanted to learn about teaching, would I go to the average teacher or the average teachers and study them? Yes, if I wanted to know the state of education. But if I really wanted to prescribe better ways of teaching, then I would go to the very best teachers, learn from them, and apply what I learned from them to others. Or in the context of leadership, would I go and study the average leader, the average manager, or would I study the best and then apply what I learned from the best to the rest? In other words, in prescribing a better way of doing things, what growing tip statistics, what studying the best does, is anything but undemocratic. It's the opposite. It actually democratizes excellence. It makes excellence, the best, accessible to all of us. I want to go over just a few fields where this is already being done fabulously, and encourage everyone here to do more of it in your respective fields. So, democratizing excellence in meditation. There's been a lot of research over the last 30, 40 years studying the quote-unquote professional meditators, those who have dedicated over 10,000 hours to meditation. And in studying them, we discovered incredible things. We discovered incredible things about them, but we discovered, more importantly, incredible things about our possibilities, our capabilities. Lama Oser is one of the Tibetan monks who was studied. He writes, the process itself of meditation has some extraordinary qualities, but not necessarily the subject. The important idea is that this process is within the reach of anyone who applies himself or herself with enough determination. Daniel Goleman, in his book Destructive Emotions, then talks about Lama Oser and the process. From the perspective of neuroscience, the point of all this research has nothing to do with demonstrating that Oser or any other extraordinary person may be remarkable in him or herself, but rather to stretch the field's assumptions about human possibility. Some of these key assumptions have already begun to expand, in part due to a revolution in neuroscience's supposition about the malleability of the brain itself. You know, until 1998, we didn't even have the idea of neuroplasticity or neurogenesis. And ever since that came onto the scene, much thanks to the amazing work done by John Kabat-Zinn and Richie Davidson, we have stretched our possibilities. We can dream bigger dreams now about what is possible, about that 40%. Not just in the area of mindfulness meditation, also in Carol Dweck's work on the growth mindset, which very much relies on neuroplasticity, our ability to change and grow throughout life. And this started off by studying the best, the growing tip. Also in the area of relationship. Just like you wouldn't go and study meditation by studying the average person on the street, you shouldn't study relationships unless you want to describe by studying the average relationship. Because you know what? If you studied the average relationship throughout history, you would be studying slavery. A master and a slave. This was the average relationship throughout history. Still in some parts of the world, but certainly everywhere in the past. But instead, what the top researchers in the world today are doing are looking at the best relationships and democratizing excellence through that. John Gottman, for years, studied divorce. In fact, he became famous for being able to predict 94%, with 94% accuracy, how many people will divorce just from seeing them interact. So this is what he writes after years of studying. At first, when I figured out how to predict divorce, I thought I'd found the key to saving marriages. But like so many experts before me, I was wrong. I was not able to crack the code to saving marriages until I started to analyze what went right in happy marriages. Positive psychology applied to relationships. And what a difference that makes. I want to go back even further. One of the most important people in history in the women liberation movement is John Stuart Mill. In 1959, the same year that Darwin published The Origins of Species, John Stuart Mill published his book on the subjugation of women. And in it, he wrote about a growing tip relationship. Because around him, there were no growing tip relationships, but his was, his own relationship, one relationship. And in this book, here is something he wrote. Only in a marriage with the best kind of equality can man and woman have alternately the pleasure of leading and being led in the path of development. I love that, leading and being led in the path of development. This is no dream of an enthusiast, but a social relation on whose general realization will depend the best development of our race. Growing Tip, his own relationship, that's what he studied in depth and used that to democratize excellence, to potentially realize what exists in every relationship. Because you know, once it's done once, the question is no longer about whether or not it's possible, but rather how is it possible? And this is what Growing Tip statistics show us. This is what the positive psychology approach shows us. Let me move to health. If you had studied the average person, certainly in developed countries, you would not find a very healthy person. So instead of studying the average, Dan Buettner from National Geographic went to study the growing tip, the best. In his wonderful book, The Blue Zones, he went to those areas where people live the longest, not just the longest, but also the best. He found 4 such areas in this book. The Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, Lindaloma, just outside Los Angeles, Sardinia, Italy, and Okinawa, Japan. Recently found another place in Greece. And what he did in this book, he looked at those places where they live the longest, when they have the most centenarians, where they have the most people, the average age is by far the highest. And the question that guided him in his research, his team as well, what can we learn from those people who live the longest? Not from the average, from the best in this context. And what the book does, it's about discovering the world's best practices in health and longevity and putting them to work in our lives. The difference that he's been making through his work for entire cities around the United States is remarkable, and it's only just beginning. The health revolution starting with tip-of-the-stem research. If we adopted the right lifestyle, says Buettner, we could add at least 10 good years and suffer a fraction of the diseases that kill us prematurely. This could mean an extra quality decade of life. Now, the prescriptions of the Blue Zones are no rocket science. They're the basics. Eat in moderation, exercise a lot, find a sense of meaning and purpose, whether it's in family, work, things we know. They're common sense. But in a quote attributed to Voltaire, common sense is not so common, especially when it comes to application. And what this research is doing is showing people scientific evidence, convincing them that they can and ought to change their practices. What about changing the self? I want to go back to Maslow. Do we study our average behavior? No. In the words of Maslow, few in number though they be, we can learn a great deal about values from the direct study of these highly evolved, most mature, psychologically healthiest individuals. So that's learning from others. And then he continues, and from the study of the peak moments of average individuals, moments in which they become transiently self-actualized. Learn from our best moments, when we experienced a peak experience, when we are in flow, when our relationship is thriving. What are these peak moments, the best moments, the growing tip in our lives that we can learn from? Apply the appreciative inquiry process to ourselves so that we can bring about positive change in our lives. And speaking of change, how do we democratize excellence in change? Because I want to go back to the quote by Daniel Goleman, which doesn't bode well. Although studies have shown that real change can result from training, most of the time the change doesn't seem to be sustained, the honeymoon effect. But the answer to the plea of bringing about real, lasting change actually lies in this very quote, in the word most. Not all programs fail. Not all programs just lead to the honeymoon effect. There are programs that work. You'll be exposed to many of them throughout this weekend. And when something works, really works, we need to appreciate it so that it appreciates, so that we have more of it. And if our focus is there, that's when we can bring about lasting change. We can do it, we can create great sandwiches for all of us, for the people we work with. If we focus on the growing tip, a little bit more in our research, a little bit more in our intervention programs. We can bring about positive change in our lives and in the lives of others if we study the best in ourselves and in others. And that's how we can come closer to fulfilling our personal, interpersonal, organizational, and societal potential. And looking ahead, I'm optimistic. I'm very optimistic. And I'm optimistic not just because some of the growing tip research tells me that if I'm optimistic, I'll live 8 to 9 years longer. I'm optimistic because in front of me, I see some of the best minds and hearts of individuals and groups eager to bring about positive change in our world. So I say, let's just do it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.